Imagine you're vacationing on a tropical paradise, when a scientist suddenly tells you that in just a few hours, the entire island could sink into the sea. Would you believe them? In today's movie, a volcano that has been dormant for nearly 80 years suddenly wakes up. But the real terror isn't the lava, it's what happens afterward. Because if a massive chunk of the island collapses into the ocean, it will trigger a tsunami powerful enough to wipe out multiple countries in a matter of hours. While thousands of tourists are busy enjoying their getaway, a team of geologists discovers signs that no one was meant to see. And the biggest mistake everyone makes? They realize it far too late. This is the story of La Palma, and today, we're going to see who survives when nature decides to hit the reset button. This film is based on the real-life volcanic disaster at La Palma that once shocked the world. The story opens with a group of friends enjoying a day at the beach. After snapping a photo, one woman suddenly realizes her earring is missing. She remembers posing for the picture and fears it must have fallen into the water. Without a second thought, her friend strips off her dress and dives into the sea to retrieve it. But the moment she hits the water, strange mist starts rising from the surface. Beneath the waves, a continuous, bubbling roar erupts, as if the entire ocean floor were being boiled alive. Here's yours, here's awe. Meanwhile, Sarah's family has just arrived on La Palma for a vacation. Known as the Volcano Island, it hasn't seen an eruption since 1948. Hoping to smooth over their marital issues, Nick booked a room with a stunning ocean view. Desperate to reconnect with his wife, Kim May, they had no idea this trip would force them to face one of the most terrifying natural disasters in history. On the other side of the island, geologist Mary and her bearded partner are heading into the forest for fieldwork. As soon as they enter a cave, they notice water gushing down the rock walls. Mary is baffled. In all her years of experience, she's never seen anything like this. She quickly grabs her equipment to collect water samples. Suddenly, her partner spots something unsettling. The ground is littered with dead bats. After a quick check, they are horrified to realize the bats died from dangerously high levels of CO2. Even worse, a massive, jagged fissure has opened up directly above the cave. At the Geological Survey Office, the director happens to catch a news report. Police have found a yacht near the coast of La Palma, and everyone on board is dead. An investigation is underway. He immediately picks up the phone, just as Mary arrives to report her findings. She warns him that CO2 and sulfur dioxide levels in the island's caves are rising at an alarming rate, something they haven't seen in years. Furthermore, an unusually long and heavy rainy season has forced massive amounts of water deep into the mountain's rock layers. That giant crack in the cave is the smoking gun. It's a precursor to catastrophic earthquakes and a potential landslide. But the director dismisses her concerns entirely. He brushes the fissure off as a natural phenomenon and insists there's no trace of toxic gas. He claims that oxygen levels are naturally lower on volcanic islands and that if an eruption were truly imminent, the warning signs would be much more obvious. These minor findings aren't enough to prove a volcanic disaster is imminent. Mary and her partner were chewed out, left speechless by their boss's stubbornness. But her bearded colleague stood by his gut. He knew his test results weren't wrong. He led Mary to a map, pointing back to 1948, when the island suffered a violent eruption. Back then, a massive fissure, kilometers long, had opened up. If their current predictions were right, a repeat eruption could cause the entire island to collapse into the sea. And once the island sank, the displacement would trigger a catastrophic tsunami. Why wouldn't the director just sound the alarm to keep the tourists safe? It turned out that a few years back, he had caused a major scandal in his career. He had publicly warned of a massive earthquake that never happened, leading to mass panic and nearly costing him his job. He wasn't about to stick his neck out again without rock-solid proof. However, they didn't know the director was actually panicking behind closed doors. He reached out to the forensic examiner from the yacht case. The autopsy revealed the victims had suffered severe chemical burns from high-temperature gas, with massive amounts of sulfur dioxide trapped in their lungs, under the water. Back with Nick's family, their daughter, Sarah, told her new friend she couldn't hang out because she had to watch her little brother. Sarah desperately wanted to make friends, but she lacked the confidence. Seeing this, her father encouraged her to go, promising to look after her brother himself. Encouraged, Sarah finally took the plunge to join her friends. With Sarah gone, Nick was left to watch his autistic son alone. But while playing with him, Nick caught a glimpse of his wife laughing it up with another man. Jealousy flared, and for a split second, He was distracted. When he snapped out of it, his son had vanished without a trace. Frantic, Nick rushed to the beach, fearing the boy had gone to find his sister. They searched until they were hoarse, eventually spotting the little boy standing on a distant rock. He was staring down at the ocean, mesmerized by a massive school of sea turtles gathering as if preparing for a great migration. Meanwhile, Mary finished analyzing the water samples. There were no impurities, which meant the water had traveled through the mountain and into the caves in a very short time. In other words, the fissure they'd found had formed less than a week ago. If that was true, everyone on the island was staring into the face of extinction. Mary and her partner rushed back up the mountain to the main fissure. The sight left them breathless. The far side of the crack was already beginning to subside. They hurriedly installed sensors to monitor it in real time. Just as feared, the fissure was widening. The movement was small for now, but at this rate, it was only a matter of time before the unthinkable happened. At the geological survey, staff finally noticed the irregularities. Gas levels were spiking, and seismic tremors were beginning to register. Realizing things were spiraling, the director contacted the National Guard to prepare for emergency evacuation. Just then, Mary called in, hearing they were still on the mountain. The director barked an order. "Listen, leave the equipment and get out of there now. Run. I hear you. Let's go. Hurry." While fleeing, they stumbled upon the massive crack. But as they prepped their gear, thick, black smoke erupted from the fissure. Mary realized this was the harbinger of an eruption. They scrambled down the mountain, trying to warn a group of campers along the way. But in the chaos, Mary took a nasty fall. When she finally woke up, she was in a hospital bed. The director told her the heartbreaking news. Her partner had inhaled too much toxic gas and hadn't made it. While the leak was contained for now, the director knew the truth. If the fissures were releasing gas, the volcano was waking up. Massive amounts of ash and lava would follow. If the eruption were large enough, it would trigger a tsunami threatening millions of lives, reaching far beyond the island to coastal regions across the globe. Yet, the director remained trapped by his own hesitation. Announcing a full-scale volcanic eruption would cause absolute chaos. He wanted to wait and observe a little longer. Mary was losing her patience. If they waited for 100% certainty, the cost would be immeasurable. Desperate, she pressured the director to go with her to the mayor's office. But the mayor was just as impossible as the director. Without absolute proof, he refused to sound the alarm. If it turned out to be another false alarm, his career, and theirs, would be over. He insisted they wait and see. Meanwhile, Nick and his wife were in the middle of a cold war over their missing son. Kim May blamed Nick for not keeping a closer watch, while Nick fired back, accusing his wife of being indifferent toward their children. The air in their hotel apartment grew suffocating. To make matters worse, Sarah was spiraling. Her friend, Charlie, had turned on her, verbally abusing her after finding out Sarah had shared a video that had actually been recorded by a stranger. Heartbroken and overwhelmed by her parents' constant fighting, Sarah couldn't take any more. She headed straight to the airport, calling her uncle in Norway to book a flight and leave the island for good. No matter how hard her uncle pressed, Sarah wouldn't say a word about what was happening. He reluctantly agreed to help, but immediately called her mother, Kim May, to break the news. Unfortunately, Kim May was deep into a yoga session and didn't hear the phone ring. Meanwhile, at the geological survey, staff watched in horror as seismic activity spiked. The epicenter was rising rapidly. The volcano could blow at any second. The director ordered an immediate shutdown of all air traffic. Volcanic ash clogs engines and causes mid-air failure, which would turn any flight into a death trap. But it was already too late. A deafening roar erupted from the summit, leaving everyone frozen in terror. The plane carrying Sarah was already taxiing down the runway. Despite the urgent, no takeoff order from air traffic control, the plane had already passed the point of no return. They were forced to take off, flying straight into the kill zone. Only then did Kim May see her brother's missed call. When she heard Sarah had gone to the airport alone, she panicked and raced to find Nick. Just as they reached the terminal, they saw a passenger plane pierce through a cloud of thick, black ash, disappearing toward the other side of the island. A massive, earth-shaking explosion followed. Kim May screamed, clutching her mouth. She knew with terrifying certainty that her daughter was on that flight. They rushed to find her, and thanks to Kim May's brother at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they received word about the crash. He sent a message saying rescue teams were working around the clock and that any survivors had been taken to the island's only hospital. But when they arrived at the hospital, They searched every ward to no avail. They checked the passenger manifest. Names with check marks had been admitted. But the others were unaccounted for. Sarah's name was on the list. Yet her whereabouts remained a total mystery. The couple was crushed, trapped in a nightmare they never could have imagined. Exhausted, they returned to their hotel, only to find Sarah sitting on the sofa, safe and sound. It turned out that just as she boarded, she received a message from Charlie, a sincere apology, begging for forgiveness. Reading those words, Sarah had made a split-second decision to deplane before takeoff. Even Charlie was shocked, realizing that a simple act of reconciliation had accidentally saved Sarah's life. After surviving the brush with death, their bond was stronger than ever. Meanwhile, at the geological survey, the team pressed the mayor again. They had to evacuate the island immediately. But the mayor was paralyzed by the same old fears. A premature evacuation would cause chaos and unnecessary casualties. He argued that it wasn't the first time the volcano had spewed ash. If it turned out to be nothing more than a minor seismic event, they would all be out of a job. Seeing that the mayor refused to issue a warning, the director ordered his staff to evacuate the island at once, choosing to stay behind himself to monitor the situation to the bitter end. Mary, though heartbroken to leave her mentor behind, had her own crisis to manage. Her brother was drunk and causing a scene at a local bar. Knowing the danger was imminent, she couldn't afford to waste time. She rushed in to intervene, trying to pry her brother away from the police. While her brother's offense was minor, Mary was arrested for obstructing justice. When the alcohol wore off, Mary's younger brother was filled with regret. He rushed to the police station to visit her, naively promising to hire the best lawyer to get her out. Little did he know, the volcano was on the verge of a full-scale eruption, set to trigger catastrophic earthquakes and tsunamis. Escaping the Death Island was now the only thing that mattered. Meanwhile, a passenger plane had unwittingly flown into the volcanic ash cloud. Within seconds, both engines were incinerated, leaving the plane uncontrollable as it plummeted into the hills. The crash was devastating, but it was merely the opening act of a much larger disaster. Any volcanologist knows that once these abnormal tremors begin, a massive eruption is inevitable. If the mountain collapses into the sea, the immense displacement will generate tsunamis hundreds of meters high, causing unimaginable destruction. A day later, the crater continued to spew black smoke, like a dormant beast slowly stirring to life. Yet, Kim May's family seemed to have forgotten the chaos, still leisurely enjoying their vacation, completely unaware that the Grim Reaper was closing in. Suddenly, the phone rang. It was Kim May's brother, shouting, "Tsunami, you have to get the kids out of there now. The situation is critical. I'm not sure this performance can continue under this ash fall." The luxury apartments are already blanketed in white smoke. From the Macon Terrace, everything is being frozen in ash. It turned out that her brother, working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, had obtained classified information. To prevent mass panic, the government had kept the news of the upcoming eruption under wraps. He had already secured a high-speed speedboat for them. In just 10 minutes, they could cross to Tenerife to the north and catch the first flight home. If they missed this golden window, the entire archipelago would be wiped off the map. They had only 20 minutes before the boat's scheduled departure. Kim May urged her husband to get the children and prepare to leave quietly. While they were scrambling to pack, Sarah suddenly dashed out. She was determined to bring her friend Charlie with her. Unable to stop her, Kim May followed her to find Charlie. But Charlie was nowhere to be found, and her phone went unanswered. Only after hearing her mother insist that a tsunami was coming did Sarah finally agree to leave with the family. The streets were empty, not a taxi in sight. Realizing time was running out, Nick made a reckless decision. He spotted a private delivery truck and bundled his family onto it. Just as the workers came running to stop them, Nick slammed on the gas and sped away. However, by the time they neared the harbor, the workers had caught up. In the chaos, Nick shoved his family onto the boat while staying behind to face the angry mob. He took a brutal beating, but managed to appease the workers with the cash from his wallet. But by the time Nick limped to the pier, the speedboat carrying his wife and children had already departed the island. At the same time, Charlie was down at the beach when she finally saw Sarah's missed calls. She called back in a panic. Sarah screamed into the phone, warning her that a tsunami was coming and to get on a boat to Tenerife at any cost before it was too late. Just minutes later, another violent tremor rocked the island, tearing out from the heart of the volcano. The director, now alone in his office, realized the true catastrophe had begun. He frantically called the city authorities once more, demanding an emergency evacuation order. Unable to board his family's boat, Nick rushed to a rental shop, desperate to find another way off the island. Just as the clerk began the paperwork, sirens wailed across the island. At the police station, Mary and her brother heard the sirens too. Her brother begged the police to release her, but the officer on duty was bound by procedure, insisting on authorization from his superiors. Suddenly, another officer burst in, screaming at everyone to evacuate. "I can't wait any longer. I hope you don't make this difficult for me. What the hell are you doing?" Across town, Nick still pleaded for a boat, but with the sirens blaring, the rental clerk refused. Just then, Nick's hotel acquaintance appeared, claiming he had bribed a captain. They sprinted to the pier, and the man helped Nick secure the final spot. Just as they sat down, the volcano erupted with savage intensity. But as the boat prepared to depart, a woman holding a child ran to the dock, pleading for a seat for her baby. Nick's heart sank. He couldn't leave the child behind. He stood up and gave his seat to the mother. As he turned and walked away, his acquaintance watched, heartbroken by Nick's selfless sacrifice. Meanwhile, the bearded geologist, recovering in the hospital, heard the massive explosions. He realized the situation was catastrophic. He didn't panic. He had foreseen this days ago. He dressed quickly and returned to the Geological Survey office. Finding the director still at his post, he chose to stay and face the end alongside his mentor. Nick, now at a dead end, stared up at the rivers of lava cascading down the mountain. Knowing he might not survive, he called his wife, urging her to take care of their children. Suddenly, Mary was released, thanks to her brother. But in their rush to flee, her overly kind-hearted brother accidentally freed a murderer from a nearby cell. Running from the station, they stumbled upon a despondent Nick. When Nick said all boats were gone, Mary's brother revealed a hidden speedboat he'd stashed from his fishing days. Hope reignited in their eyes, and they raced to the remote cove. But just as they prepared to launch, the murderer appeared, gun in hand. The man they had inadvertently saved now wanted to steal their boat for his own accomplices. The criminal demanded the boat for himself. When he fired, Mary's brother was struck and collapsed. Mary rushed to his side, but he passed away before he could utter a final word. As the murderer's gang arrived on the beach, Nick managed to wrestle the gun away. Holding them at bay, Nick and Mary successfully launched the boat, escaping just as the island began to crumble. Out at sea, Mary witnessed a nightmare. A wall of water hundreds of meters high loomed on the horizon. Rushing toward them at terrifying speed, Nick grabbed the final coordinates from his brother-in-law, a safe zone to the east. He had to physically shake a paralyzed Mary back to her senses. They gunned the engine, racing into the safety corridor just as the tsunami roared behind them. At Tenerife Airport, the final flight was preparing to depart. Kim May and her kids had made it to the gate. The agent handed out 4 yellow wristbands, the boarding passes. But Sarah kept looking back, terrified for Charlie. Suddenly, she spotted Charlie through the glass, who lacked a boarding pass. Without hesitation, Sarah gave Charlie her father's wristband. Inside the plane, Kim May realized Sarah was missing. As the plane began to move, she took her son and forced her way off the flight against everyone's protests. Back on the island, the director and the bearded geologist, now in protective gear, ascended the mountain. They knew their time was up, so they chose to witness the volcano's raw power one last time. At the edge of the crater, they didn't show fear. The geologist pulled out a bottle of 82 vintage red wine. "You really are a madman." "Not at all. This wine is excellent. I'm a beer guy, but even I have to admit that. We have to finish it, right? Damn it, I can't get the cork out." Before they could even open the bottle, the beast that had slept for 78 years fully awakened. A massive explosion tore the island apart. Half the mountainside collapsed into the deep, triggering the cataclysmic tsunami. On the plane, Sarah had managed to get Charlie back on board. She scanned the cabin for her mother and brother, but they weren't there. As the flight began to taxi, she had no idea they had stepped off to find her. "Mom, hurry, Mom." Then, Kim May finally received a message from her brother, giving her one last chance to save her family. Through the message, Kim May finally received the coordinates for the safe zone, but she couldn't determine the direction. Her young son, however, cleverly calculated the longitude and latitude, quickly pinpointing the exact spot her brother had described. A nearby airport employee, after seeing the information, decided to drive the mother and son there immediately. By now, the tsunami had swallowed the sky. looming over the airport. The plane had just begun its takeoff roll when a deadly fissure tore the runway apart right behind it. On the other side, Nick and Mary were pushing their speedboat to its absolute limit, racing toward the safe zone with the tsunami clawing at their heels. Just as they neared their destination, Nick's phone died, leaving them in the dark. In a final, life-or-death moment, they managed to maneuver the boat into a hidden bay. Stepping ashore, they were shocked to find it packed with other survivors. This was the safe zone Kim May's brother had described. Upon realizing the scale of the disaster, he had consulted with experts who discovered a unique geological feature on the island's eastern side. The tsunamis triggered by the volcanic eruption were spreading outward in a circle, while they would reach Tenerife and submerge everything within 20 minutes. The two waves would intersect at this specific point on the east coast, effectively canceling each other out. It was the only place on Earth where one could outrun the catastrophe. Risking his entire career, Kim May's brother had secretly tapped into the press room microphone to broadcast the coordinates to the world. That was why Nick saw so many people gathered there. Yet, as he searched the crowd, his heart sank. He couldn't find his wife anywhere. Hearing rumors that the island had been completely flattened and that the final flight hadn't made it out, Nick fell into deep despair, believing he was the sole survivor of his family. But in the midst of his grief, a voice rang out from the distance. "Dad, Dad!" On the plane, which had barely survived the tsunami's impact, a few lucky souls remained. Sarah awoke to find Charlie unresponsive. Without a second's hesitation, she lifted her friend and laid her flat on the floor. With the help of a flight attendant, Charlie was pulled back from the jaws of death. After surviving such a nightmare together, their bond was unbreakable. When they finally stepped off the wreckage, they were horrified by the apocalyptic state of the island. The tsunami had caused catastrophic damage to coastlines across the globe, with several island nations wiped off the map entirely. Nick and his wife had assumed they would never see their daughter again. But just as they were beginning to accept the cruel reality, a rescue helicopter touched down on the beach. Their young son was the first to recognize his sister stepping off the chopper. Against all odds, after the greatest disaster in history, their family had miraculously survived. Only Mary stood apart, silently nursing her grief. She knew that from this day forward, the world was a little emptier, as she would never see her brother again.